What are some things I can look for when I pick up an instrument?
The sound. I mean, that's my number one thing.
Yeah, it's no longer a good deal. It's become a bad deal.
And this is going to be a deep dive on this subject. Welcome to the Music Cave. In today's video, we're going to be talking about what to look for when you're buying a saxophone. And I have a special guest, Dr. Geoff Landman, who is a professor of saxophone at the University of Kansas.
Hi everyone, and hey Scott, thanks for having me. This is a topic I'm looking forward to talking about. As a college professor, I have a lot of students who audition coming from high school where maybe they're still playing on a beginner instrument or an intermediate instrument. And as they transition into collegiate study, it's important to have an instrument that is both reliable and also plays at a high enough level that you can get the most out of your collegiate study on the instrument. So yeah, let's get into this topic.
Okay. Yeah, so when you're shopping for a saxophone, what are some of the things that you look for? And you're a classical saxophone player.
Yeah, I teach big air quotes, classical saxophone at KU.
Yeah.
And so, we do everything from playing actual classical music, like transcriptions of Bach or Telemann, for example, to playing, some of the weirdest, craziest music that's being written right now. So including lots of extended techniques, playing way into the altissimo register, multiphonics, quarter tones. So we're asking the instrument to do a lot, everything spanning like hundreds of years of composition.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think there are still some like prerequisites for a good instrument. And as we're starting to talk about this topic, I was thinking about it in kind of two ways. Like when I first play an instrument, there are things that I feel like will qualify it, that make me want to buy it, and then there's other things that I feel like eliminate it from consideration. And so some of those things would be like intonation, response, how does it respond, and then getting to the idea of like what are some things that would compel me to buy it after it meets those prereqs would be, sound quality, projection. I think the aesthetics are kind of important. Are you drawn to the instrument? Do you want to play it? Or do you, when you open the case, is it exciting? So yeah, I think there's a lot there to evaluate when you are, first trying to decide what instrument to get.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation because I mainly I do play jazz and rock and roll, and so the type of saxophone I'm looking for is probably going to be completely different than something that you're looking for. So there's all kinds of variables in what somebody might decide is most appropriate for what they're looking for. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Let's start with intonation. Because as a repair tech, a lot of times intonation might be something that can be adjusted out of the horn. Like if you're fighting leaks, you may be fighting a leak that is causing the saxophone to have poor intonation in certain areas or bad key heights. You go play a saxophone, you say, okay, the intonation's bad. I play a saxophone, I'll go, okay, something's weird here, but maybe I can fix it. So there's a lot of variables there because when I look at a saxophone, I'm really looking at the sound. I mean, that's my number one thing. Now, of course, if there's intonation issues, then you can't play it.
Right.
Which I have had horns that I really like how they play, but they've had just some weird notes, and you're like, I just couldn't get them out of the horn. They're just something that was poorly done at the factory 50, 60, 70 years ago.
And so I think, the distinction here, it needs to be made when you're evaluating a new instrument versus a used instrument or a vintage instrument, where, a new instrument, I would say you would have to assume that even if it's leaking a little bit, the intonation is probably pretty close to where it's going to end up.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I could be wrong. You're obviously the mechanical expert here. Versus a used instrument where, I think maybe before you start evaluating intonation, you need to take a look at the mechanical condition of the thing. And maybe that's the question I have for you is, for someone who doesn't have the expertise you have, who's working on instruments all the time, what are some ways that I can, like, what are some things I can look for when I pick up an instrument and say, like, is it in good condition, or is it about to need an overhaul, or does it need new pads? How could I have a better sense of the playing condition that it's in?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's also another good point that you made. If you're looking at brand new horns, and you can try out 5 of the same exact horn, then that's completely different than looking on Craigslist and finding something for. Wait, do people use Craigslist anymore?
What year is this?
Yeah. Looking in the paper to find an old saxophone. If you can play the saxophone, you should be able to. If you can play down to the low B flat easily, it's probably in really good or pretty good playing condition. And if you're struggling with notes, it's got some leaks and issues. I mean, you can't compare key heights to your own instrument. Every saxophone is going to be a little different, but if you see a saxophone and the keys are really closed compared to what your saxophone looks like, more than likely the key heights probably aren't right. So stuff like that can be adjusted out. And you have to think about that when you're comparing cost. Like if you're looking at a used saxophone and it's priced top dollar, and there's no room for getting it work done, then and it has issues, then either you need to talk the cost down, or
it's no longer a good deal. It's become a bad deal.
And this is going to be a deep dive on this subject.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I mean there's so many variables here, but yeah, if you could bring a leak light, put a light in, and if you know how to check for leaks, you could see if things are leaking. You could look at pads visually and see if they're brown or brown and crusty, or dark brown and crusty.
Wrong color of brown.
Or I mean, if it's old enough, you might have pads that are worn out. You can see the felt.
So I guess once we've kind of played through the horn a little bit, it plays down to low B flat okay. The playing condition is okay. The response is pretty good. As we said, we've played a chromatic scale on it, bottom to top, and intonation seems workable. So let's talk about how we, I guess, like fall in love with the instrument, or like what are these things that we find that make us actually pull the trigger on buying a new instrument.
We were talking off camera about the ergonomics, and what I was saying, how the style of music I play. I mean, you can see the horn that I play on.
What is the instrument you play on?
This is a 1932 Connu Under 2. Okay. And I absolutely love this saxophone. It plays great. I've done some modifications, minor modifications, where it actually feels really good.
Like what?
So I've lowered the thumb. I mean I've raised the thumb hook, and then I've lowered the neck strap ring.
Okay.
And so the thumb hook was just so low that it was. I mean, my thumb was probably this low and just not in a comfortable position. So I raised it up as much as I could without getting. I mean, you can see it's really close to that F sharp key, so it's without doing something crazy with it. And then lowering the neck strap ring, just the horn's a lot more balanced in your hand with the neck strap. I've raised some of the side keys and the palm keys, and then I've actually lowered or moved over the bis key.
Oh, is that right?
Because you can see it used to be.
How would you even play
I don't know, but you see people that play them and their fingers are way over here, so they can hit that bis key. But that's one reason I like buying these horns that have been relacquered or have almost no lacquers. You can do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you don't feel bad about.
Yeah, because I don't like to modify these things to where they look goofy. And this saxophone, you can't really tell that I've done too much to it.
So I mean, obviously, if you're in the market for an instrument like that, and you're someone like Scott, you have the knowledge and the ability to modify it quite heavily to meet your playing. One other topic that we were talking about, possibly chatting about, and maybe we'll do a future video on, is that like the modification of instruments or just keys. And I don't know if you can see, maybe I'll bring it a little closer, but my own maybe it doesn't autofocus. I've added some.
I can throw some pictures above.
Okay, yeah, I've added some. It's a kind of a putty product called Sugru, and a lot of us use that to build up our palm keys. Or I don't have it anywhere else, but a number of colleagues will use it elsewhere on the instrument as well to kind of modify the ergonomics. And, to suit your own hand shape and sort of playing position.
And you do that's the most nicest job I've ever seen on one of those.
Well,
Usually it looks
you.
like a 5-year-old put
yeah,
a
just
lot
like
of
a
play
blob.
down. And one thing I do tell people is, depending on what kind of music they're playing, is most ergonomics you can get used to.
Mm-hmm.
At least, like you were talking, some of the pieces you play are complicated enough that you actually do need to have some modern ergonomics to get around the parts.
Well, I still think I could probably play almost any. I mean, if we're talking about altos and any kind of modern piece on something made after like the Mark VI type instrument, I think the ability to have this like what is it called, floating spatula or
tilting
spatula is quite nice. If the bottom, if you have any sort of really fast stuff down there. Aside from that, I could probably make anything from then on work. Obviously, a Selmer feels a little different than a Yamaha, than a Yanagisawa. Everything feels a little different, but you spend a month practicing your scales on it, and I think you'll probably feel it quite at home after that amount of time.
I played a balanced action before this. Actually, I played a King Super 20, then a balanced action, then a Con 10M, so I'm kind of going, my time frames are going backwards. Now I'm down to 1932, so I'm not sure what I'll play next.
An Adolph Sax original.
Yeah. But yeah, you can get used to anything. Also, let me know in the comments below questions and thoughts on this topic.
Let us know in the comments if you like shiny or unshiny.
Obviously, like unshiny.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, aside from ergonomics, one of the reasons that classical saxophone players tend to gravitate more towards modern instruments probably has to do with just having more fingering possibilities. I know that having an high F sharp key or not having a high F sharp key can be kind of a contentious thing in the jazz world. I've heard the argument that not having a high F sharp tone hole maybe makes the instrument play a little differently. From my perspective, from what I do, it's not about the ability to play the F sharp, because I promise you I can play that note in many different ways. But it's about being able to have many different choices about how to play that note and making the most musically appropriate choice. If I'm playing a line that goes up and only goes up to that F sharp, and I'm approaching it from palm keys, going to a front F sharp kind of sounds like it doesn't match the timbre. And likewise, the high F sharp key allows you to do other sorts of different multiphonics. Like there's a whole bunch of multiphonics that opens up. A bunch of other altissimo fingerings, like way beyond the high F sharp that that key allows you to do, as well as like weird little trills and tremolo things. It just opens up a lot more possibilities there. So give me all the buttons. I want all the buttons possible.
Right. And I always tell people, because this horn plays so well, people play it and they love it.
I've played it. It's great. It's
yeah.
just all the way to the bottom. It's
and
easy.
Yeah, and I'm so used. I tell people you can get used to a horn like this, and I go pick up like a Mark VI and I'll fumble around on like the table keys.
Sure.
And I go, well, that Mark VI doesn't have a high F sharp, but like if I play a horn with a high F sharp, I never use the side F sharp, and then my altissimo F sharp doesn't cooperate with that horn. And I'm like, I can't play this modern horn. I have to be playing these old horns. That's what I'm used to. So I guess it goes both ways. If someone should be telling me, you can play a modern horn, it just full range scales and you'll
there you
get
go. Yeah. But if the fewer times you switch horns, that's the less scales you have to practice, right? Yeah. No, false.
Oh wait, no, okay. So I do think sound is very important, and one thing, like we were playing each other's horns the other day, and you wanted to hear how I sound on your horn, and so I put on my large chamber auto link that I'm so used to this big bore con, and I was struggling playing your saxophone, and I kept changing reeds thinking, what is going on with my reeds today? I've never had these kind of issues, and then I picked up my horn and played it and went, oh wow, this mouthpiece and this combination I'm just so used to that I'm having trouble playing your saxophone with my mouthpiece setup. So when you go, my point of that is when you go try a saxophone, your mouthpiece might not be exactly what that saxophone needs, or the reed needs to change a little bit or something.
Exactly. It's if you only play one mouthpiece and one reed and you're trying a bunch of horns, that might not be the best combination to get the most out of that instrument. for example, like a Yanagisawa soprano feels very resistant to me compared to my Selmer soprano, and so I am kind of in between reed strengths when I go between the two. And so if I were to just take my normal setup and try to evaluate that instrument, I probably really wouldn't like it. But on the appropriate reed strength, it's actually a good instrument. So when you're stepping into a practice room to evaluate gear, definitely bring a lot of different reeds, a lot of different mouthpieces, ligatures even, ready to help you find the right combination to get the most out of that instrument.
And one thing I do tell my clients is if you can find the saxophone that you want, I prefer this because you can get a freshly overhauled saxophone, but try to find the saxophone you want that's priced accordingly to where you can afford to get it overhauled after it's done. Mm-hmm. So something like this is probably worth $2,500, and if you could buy a saxophone like this for $1,500 or less, have it overhauled, and then everything on it's perfect, and you have a great playing saxophone. That's what I prefer people to do, but of course that's hard to do because then you have to buy a saxophone that doesn't play, and then hope it plays how you like it when it's done. So that's just another deep dive that...
Well, and a lot of people are even finding that new instruments are benefiting from a setup or an overhaul. So, oftentimes even a brand new instrument, it's not possible to really fully evaluate its full potential until it gets some work done by someone like Scott here.
Yeah, that's true. And like I've mentioned in many videos, even brand new saxophones suffer from poor key venting at the minimum. Mm-hmm. There's very few saxophones that come in and go, and I think, wow, this horn's set up really nicely. Mm-hmm. It's either got leaks or it's got bad key venting or it's got both. Or in the case of the Supreme that's coming over later, that horn looked like a $200 Chinese saxophone.
And it's closer to a $10,000 saxophone.
One thing that I, being a real saxophone nerd, is I love the history of these old saxophones, and I love knowing that certain musicians played these types of saxophones. And so the cosmetic looks is important to me. Mm-hmm. Maybe more important than some people, but like I just love how the saxophone looks. Like you mentioned earlier, like do you like how it looks? Are you going to be excited to get it out of the case and practice it? And this saxophone, it's weird. I've had a saxophone for years, and I look at it and go, man, that thing looks cool. I want to play it. And I played it for a song, and I'm so used to it. And it plays so well that you get excited to play it because the sound you get out of it is just so nice. So to me, having something that looks nice and something you're excited to look at and play is really important.
Well, I have also, I do play modern instruments, but I do really appreciate the history of the instruments. I mean, obviously the history of the brand, but, for example, my teacher in undergrad, Donald Cinta, read this book by another University of Michigan faculty member. Nicholas Del Banco was the author, and it was about... I guess this author married, his wife was the daughter of a famous cellist, and this cellist owned a Stradivarius, like one of the named instruments. And this book is really fascinating because it chronicles the history of this particular cello. And you think about these instruments like that are over 350 years old at this point, and who they've been in the room with, which monarchs they've played for, which famous concert halls they've played in, which musicians have poured their entire lives into those instruments, and it's really incredible to think about like that. I don't know if you've seen the movie starring Samuel L. Jackson, Red Violin.
Oh, I don't.
You got to see that. Okay. It's so good. Yeah. Got to see that.
But I'll link below.
Yeah, link here.
Probably won't do that.
Yeah, it won't be there. But it's about exactly that. I mean, it's kind of a fictionalized version of that, cool. But it's about the history of this one instrument, and it's sort of like a cursed instrument. So it gets kind of sensationalized. But an instrument like that certainly has that. In a way, and you don't have the story to tell when you just order it from Woodwind and Brasswind. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that can be a compelling thing too. I mean, my own instrument, I didn't buy new, even though this is a modern instrument. This is a
Let's hear about your
saxophone. I also have a tale of discovery on this one, which is kind of cool. Like, this is a sterling silver Series 3 Selmer, which are quite valuable instruments, but I was very fortunate to find it used for a very, very good price. I lucked into getting it for actually less than a brand new lacquered Series 3 cost at the time. And the story was that I was a doctoral student at New England Conservatory in Boston, and right next door to NEC was the music store Rayburn's, where famous saxophone technician Emilio Lyons worked for many years. But I had just started my studies at NEC, and my saxophone teacher at the time, Ken Radnofsky, suggested that I try playing a Leger reed. Wasn't for me, turns out. But I went next door to buy one, and hanging on the wall was this instrument, and it was used, and apparently someone who owned a local laundromat had come in a few years before wanting to buy the best saxophone they could, and they sold him this one. And the day before I walked in, they came in and traded it in for a tenner. And so I was very lucky to stumble on this, because I certainly, as a struggling graduate student, was not able to afford a $20,000 instrument. But I'm very lucky to have one now. So yeah, it is kind of a modern instrument, but I do have a little bit of a tale of discovery. And maybe it does have, maybe it hasn't played for monarchs, and maybe hasn't been played by famous musicians, but it has been played by someone who owned a laundromat.
That's impressive, though.
Yeah.
Laundromats.
Yeah, an entrepreneur.
That's a cool place.
Yeah.
One other thing is we should maybe mention is the type of sounds you get out of different types of saxophones. Sure. Like I mentioned a lot, like a spread sound or a focus sound, maybe a big core or a focus core, or a bright sound, dark sound, and that does change within the saxophone for sure. And so this saxophone has a really big focused sound, and so maybe someone who's trying to play classical music, it might struggle playing something like this, because there is a lot of flexibility in the sound, and I know sometimes people who's used to playing like a really focused Yamaha or something will play the saxophone and just say, I can't even play any notes in tune, because they're just so used to having a saxophone that's just always right there on every note. But you lose that big core also when you play a saxophone like that, which is all personal preference, because you may want that focus sound for the type of music you're playing, which isn't classical music. It may be a rock and roll sound that you just want that laser focused sound with a really small chamber, big baffle mouthpiece that just cuts. And so that's just something you're listening to a player. Maybe you really like Dexter Gordon. Well, Dexter Gordon played a Con 10M, a Con 30M, later Mark 6, but like to get that Dexter Gordon sound, in my opinion, you need to play a 10M, because that gets that big fat core. Yeah.
I mean, I think as a player and as a teacher, I'm always trying to get my students and myself to develop flexibility to do a lot of different things. First and foremost, I think myself that as a modern saxophone player, I want to be able to step on stage with my soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, like on stage already, and just go from one piece to the next and go be able to play all four horns. I feel like that's being able to have that flexibility, to just pick it up and play it and feel comfortable immediately, not have to like reorient yourself, it is flexibility, but I also think it's important to have the flexibility to sound in different ways. Before I got this in my role at KU, I was living in New York, and a lot of my playing was doing the freelance thing and playing with maybe different chamber groups, different new music ensembles, different orchestras, and I can think of many different orchestral gigs where you're maybe premiering a new piece for orchestra, and you're the saxophone player, and you're meant within one piece to sound like you fit in perfectly with a top-notch like woodwind orchestra section, and then the next moment you're imitating like a busker in the subway. And how do you have the flexibility to do that on one mouthpiece and one horn when you don't have the time to change. You know, obviously, it's not going to be the most perfect, convincing version if you're not able to change gear. But to have the ability to manipulate your own tone in such a way to do that, I think is important. You know, one thing we were talking about before we turned the camera on was the idea of playing different horns for different types of music. And I think you were just kind of mentioning that, like a rock gig versus like trying to get the Dexter Gordon sound. And maybe that might influence your gear choice. I feel like for the longest time, classical saxophonists have had this mentality that I have one setup, this is my mouthpiece, and this is my saxophone, and this is my sound, and it gets that sound. And if you don't want that sound, then you don't want me, you know? But that's not real life, especially in the world of like New York City freelance. That world is, we're paying you to be this person, that person, and the next person from one measure to the next. You know, I've also become more open to the idea in the last like 5-10 years of changing my gear for different pieces. You know, I'll play a different mouthpiece for different pieces. I'll play different reed strength for different pieces. I actually really do like this idea that we were just talking about like playing vintage or more vintage saxophones for pieces, you know, more standard saxophone pieces that were written in the early 20th century. Like, what about playing Glazunov Concerto or Creston Sonata on a Busher that it was written for, or you know, instruments that were manufactured around the time these pieces were written? It's kind of, you know, our version of like playing a Baroque flute or a Baroque violin on a piece by Bach, for example. So I think that these are cool concepts.
I dig. And that's why one of the reasons I like playing these old horns is because you see pictures of like album covers and you're like, oh, there's Lester Young playing this saxophone. You're like, I can play this saxophone. I mean, I'll never be Lester Young, but
it'll get you there. It'll get you a lot closer than if you're playing this saxophone.
If you don't hear me play, you might not know that. That's going to do it for the video today. I hope it was helpful and informative. And please let me know in the comments below your thoughts on this subject and if you have any suggestions on finding a saxophone. Thanks for watching. My name's Scott Reed. I'm a wood repair technician.
I'm Geoff Landman.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.